Hello, and thank you for joining me. My name is Haegele-Ryterski, and I'm a doctoral student in the Public Administration program at the University of Illinois Springfield. Through this presentation, I hope to show the importance of looking at the injustices and inequities of LGBTQ communities through a public administration lens to invoke changes in the system. And everything that we seek to change starts with research. Past research shows that LGBTQ populations experience higher rates of victimization. They are disproportionately involved in the criminal justice system, and once arrested, these populations often experience higher levels of discrimination and maltreatment within the criminal justice system. Because of this, the subfield of queer criminology has quickly come into purview. For instance, according to a 2019 study by the Gain Center, which utilized data from the 2017 National Inmate Survey, at least 3.5% of the US population identified within the LGBTQ spectrum. However, the sexual minority representation in men's jails and prisons were 6.2% and 9.3% respectively, while the sexual minority representation in women's jails and prisons were 35.7% and 42.1% respectively. Furthermore, prison terms for LGBTQ people more frequently exceeded a 20-year sentence. While in prison, they are more likely to receive disciplinary segregation or solitary confinement, which is often reported to be for their safety because they were antagonizing officers or other inmates, or they were not complying with the command of the officer, which is often noted to be after they were physically, mentally, or sexually harassed by other inmates or at the hands of the officer themselves. Despite their small representation in the general public, they have staggering populations within the US jail and prison populations. But in either environment, the civil rights and equitable treatment of these people has a considerable need for improvement. In response, many researchers have begun conducting groundbreaking work in the field of queer criminology. So what exactly is queer criminology? In the past, criminological research has not been able to move past deficit or deviance models of LGBTQ offenders or truly capture the unique circumstances which encompass LGBTQ communities with regard to the criminal justice system. From this gap in the research came the subfield of queer criminology. Queer criminology exposes the heterosexism and sexism of criminal justice practice and pushes to bring awareness to how the lives of LGBTQ people are impacted by various criminal justice processes. The term queer, in this sense, can be viewed as synonymous with change. As Dwyer, Ball, and Crofts put it in their book, Queer Criminology, the goal is ultimately to queer and disrupt these processes within the field of criminology. It also allows criminologists to recognize that LGBTQ people, just like everyone else, can be victims, offenders, as well as agents of social, political, and public service systems. However, there are unique challenges that this population face that must be addressed in the interest of greater social justice for LGBTQ people. The current research in queer criminology looks into such topics as the increased victimization and discrimination LGBTQ people experience, restructuring the way people synonymize persons from LGBTQ communities with terminologies such as disgust and pedophiles, and the intentional or unintentional barriers that transgender or other LGBTQ identifying people face. While queer criminology has limited literature that looks at these issues through a public administration lens, to date, no research in the field has looked at these issues through the Bowman and Deal framework. This perspective is an essential consideration due to public administrators' influences within the criminal justice system, most notably their influence on the creation and enforcement of criminal policies, and the power that personal and organizational perspectives have on LGBTQ involvement in the justice system. Looking at these topics of LGBTQ inequality and injustice through a public administration lens allows us to discover potential flaws within the system that can possibly be corrected through changes in leadership methodologies. Therefore, utilizing a cross-disciplinary approach between public administration and queer criminology, I considered how Bullman and Deal's four-frame model informs some of the major themes of queer criminology presented by Dwyer, Ball, and Crofts' edited volume, Queering Criminology. Frames are important in public administration because they help show how they cognitively filter environments to make sense of their experiences and ultimately influence their decisions. More specifically, administrators gather information, make judgments, and produce actions based on their personal experiences and organizational influences, which determines how they interact with the LGBTQ populations. This research is important because systems can be designed to foster inequity. They are reluctant and slow to change, especially when there is no research to show that their process has room for improvement. And with the increasing fluidity of gender identification, this type of research can show that organizational cultures need to be reshaped. Justice agencies need to position themselves to meet the unique demands of this population to provide fair and equitable treatment. And they must examine their policies and practices to improve operations and earn the trust of LGBTQ populations by addressing known disparities within the agency. Once directives are made at the top, they must be enforced and followed by all actors, starting with the actors at the top who are looked up to for guidance. This is particularly important because employees will not buy into new directives without leadership guidance and engagement with employees. Bullman and Deal's four-frame model includes the structural, human resources, political, and symbolic frames. And it is through these four frames that Bullman and Deal, in a sense, queer the way in which public administrators view their organization to overcome challenges. Specifically, this model not only allows administrative leaders to see their organization's challenges through these frames to gain a better perspective of their behaviors within their organization by asking the right questions and diagnosing the vital issues, but each frame also offers a different perspective on the ethical responsibilities of organizations and the moral authority of leaders. Within each of the four frames, Bullman and Deal presents different perspectives on the ethical responsibilities and moral authorities of organizations and leaders. When looking at equity and justice for the LGBTQ population, it is important to introduce the concepts of ethics to the approaches of leadership as it carries implications for creating ethical communities or organizations and reviving the moral virtues of leadership. Once a perspective is gained, leaders decide which frame or frames to use to make beneficial changes based on the unique challenges they are facing. Described metaphorically as the factory, the structural frame is task-oriented and focuses on the how-to of change that concentrates on creating systems and procedures, roles and responsibilities, developing clear strategies and tasks, and setting measurable goals. More specifically, it is often regarded as the factory or machine perspective that helps leaders and employees to understand the structure of the organization. Major concepts within the structural frame focus on the rules and policies within the organization and the organizational chart, like the hierarchical structure. In particular, it is a frame which considers the rational array of roles and responsibilities for each division in relation to the purpose and strategies of the organization. The structural frame also offers a viewpoint in how members within those divisions contribute to not only their division, but to the overarching goals of the organization. Some challenges that organizations may face include aligning tasks and strategies to the structure of the organization, available technologies, and the atmosphere of the working environment. An excellent example of queer criminology as it relates to the structural frame was presented in Chapter 12 of Dwyer, Ball, and Crofts. This chapter looked at intimate partner violence within the Queensland transgender community to discover barriers to LGBTQ communities when accessing services and seeking help. Intimate partner violence is defined as any pattern of behavior within an intimate relationship used to coerce, dominate, or isolate a partner. Often when the police are called to an altercation between LGBTQ couples, the call is generally not recorded as domestic violence, which holds greater weight for criminal prosecution, but as a standard assault and battery. According to the Private Lives survey recorded in this chapter, of the transgender people who called the police, 33.3% of transgender males and 50% of transgender females felt that they did not receive any respect from police sent out to attend, and they believed police actions were related to discrimination. While misrecording the event could be due to discrimination or because the officer failed to ask the right questions without intending to discriminate, it could also be a lack of clear organizational guidelines on how to handle family violence involving LGBTQ partners. However, discrimination against transgender and other LGBTQ identifying people is often exercised throughout many social institutions, not just by the police. Some key barriers identified included transphobia, concerns about disclosure of one's transgender status, a misplaced focus on their gender by service providers, and the limits of gendered services. When seeking help for domestic partner violence, many victims feel that they are required to out themselves. And once outed, their self-identification may lead to service providers focusing their attention on the person's gender identity rather than the violence that brought them in. As Papazian and Ball explain, while it is unlikely that all such services are intrinsically transphobic, the traditional definition of intimate partner violence, coupled with the heterosexist and cissexist assumptions about such violence, nevertheless produces a situation where many services are simply unavailable to transgender people and could potentially, though unintentionally, discriminate against victims who do not identify as cisgender. One of the biggest challenges identified in this chapter was through a gap analysis of domestic violence services for LGBTQ communities. The analysis found that out of the 65 services surveyed, only 5 rated themselves as fully competent to work with transgender clients. Overall, many domestic violence services are gendered in nature and sex segregated. Therefore, services directed at men might ignore the fact that while someone might identify as male, they were socialized as female growing up and spent most of their life as a woman, thus rendering those services inappropriate and ineffective. Within the field of public administration, we could look at these challenges and find some appropriate solutions through the structural frame. As Bowman and Deal suggest, excellence requires more than pious sermons from top management. It demands commitment and autonomy at all levels of an enterprise. So how would leaders in this situation foster dedication within police to provide equitable protection and services to transgender and other LGBTQ identifying people? Possible solutions within this frame suggest that employees need clear directives and genuine support at the top, such as police from the courts and service providers from their directors, or they will not invest in new initiatives. If there are a lack of rules defining what employees are supposed to be doing, then they are more likely to allow their personal beliefs to inform their actions. Furthermore, when leaders are defining new goals and the strategies and actions needed to achieve those goals, providing authorship to employees allows them to become more invested in the process of building equity. Through this method, leaders can not only increase their influence and build more productive organizations, but employees can experience the satisfactions of creativity, craftsmanship, and a job well done. Steering away from the traditional perspectives that employees are cogs in a machine, employed only to achieve maximum efficiency for the organization, the human resources frame places a high emphasis on the needs of people within the organization, and it is often described metaphorically as extended family. This frame also addresses people's needs for human contact, personal growth, and job satisfaction. As such, there is a large focus on providing employees with opportunities to grow and the power to make decisions that will allow them to perform their jobs well. Therefore, researchers within the human resources frame focus on human motivation, what intrinsic or extrinsic factors trigger motivation, and what methods are more effective. The challenges that are often seen within the human resources frame include maintaining the alignment or balance of the organization's needs with employees' needs. A great example of queer criminology as it relates to the human resources frame was presented in Chapter 8 of Dwyer, Ball, and Crofts. This chapter looked at the chalk rainbow crossing movement in Sydney, Australia, and the conspicuous use of police discretion not to arrest the people that created them. In late 2013, the city of Sydney, Australia, removed the original rainbow crossing from Oxford Street. Although it was created with permanent paint, the city claimed that it was only meant to be on display temporarily. After it was removed, many people took to the streets with their chalk to recreate the iconic feature all over the city in protest, which came to be known as the Rainbow Movement. Despite evidence that shows these participants were in violation of criminal damage to property and graffiti laws, as well as transport legislation that could result in formal charges against participants of the Rainbow Movement, Sydney police chose not to prosecute. It is suggested by Crofts that police were already sensitive to various allegations due to previous LGBTQ issues identified within police departments. Consequently, police were hesitant to take any action against participants of the Rainbow Crossing movement for fear of worsening their relationships with LGBTQ communities. Within the field of public administration, we could look at the challenges presented here and find some appropriate solutions through the human resources frame. It is in this frame that we discover that employees invested in recreating the system are going to benefit because it is their idea of what the system should look like. Additionally, organizations that allow personal growth and generate job satisfaction cause employees to tie their actions back to their contributions to their division and the overarching goals of the organization. Although laws and legislations were in place that allowed police to arrest and charge participants of the Rainbow Crossing movement, the courts allowed officers the discretion and power to make the decision on whether or not it was important enough to risk damaging any possible progress they have made in their relationships with LGBTQ communities. This employee empowerment is central to human resources frame, as it shows a sense of appreciation and trust for the abilities of the employee. But this sense of empowerment cannot be achieved without leadership engagement. The political frame is described metaphorically as the jungle and addresses the organizational challenges of people or interest groups within the organization that have conflicting and often hidden agendas. More specifically, there are often a few people that will not agree on how to attain specific goals. Thus, politics and personal interests ignite and take priority over others. These varied views often generate conflicts that can either benefit or hinder the success of the organization. For instance, people within the organization typically form coalitions and compete against other groups for limited time and resources. Oftentimes, this includes working behind others' backs in order to ensure that their projects, efforts, or hidden agendas succeed. The success of the person or group in attaining their goals depends on the power or influence they hold within the organization. Subsequently, it is vital to give power and leadership to the right leaders. Leaders who maintain that the success of the organization is achieved ethically is a top priority. And it is in the political frame that leaders focus on power, conflict, competition, and organizational politics to develop coalition building, conflict resolution work, and power-based building that will ultimately support the leader's initiatives. While having power and building coalitions is often viewed in a negative light, it should not always be viewed and interpreted this way. An example of queer criminology as it relates to the political frame was presented in Chapter 10 of Dwyer, Ball, and Crofts. This chapter discussed how LGBTQ people generate the feeling of safety while out in public. Among LGBTQ communities, there has been a considerable increase in anxiety over the past decade regarding the issue of safety, especially in the context of visiting pubs and clubs. Although there has been an increase in queer venues since the legalization of homosexual relationships, many spaces are simultaneously safe for their LGBTQ clientele while they are within the building, but they then become unsafe upon their exit. It is in response to the perceived or actual threat of homophobic or heterosexist and cissexist violence that LGBTQ people face on a day-to-day basis that shapes the way in which these groups personally regulate their safety routines and practices through a range of strategies that often minimizes and self-police any visible signs of their sexuality. Unfortunately, safety for LGBTQ communities have been left predominantly up to the person. This raises the question of state responsibility and the police requirements to serve and protect. In many areas, however, the state remains a significant source of harm, not only when they do not protect LGBTQ communities through unwillingness to support them, but also in many of their efforts to protect them. Ultimately, as Philborn suggests, what it means to create a safe space will vary depending on the local context and culture, as well as across international contexts. Tying this to the field of public administration, we can look at the challenges and again find appropriate solutions, though this time through the political frame. As previously mentioned, the political frame is characteristically competitive, with few people or groups that will not agree on how to attain certain goals. Thus, politics and personal interests ignite and often take priority over others to accomplish their agendas. Although the political frame is generally viewed in a negative light, it does not always need to be. The political frame can be used to remove self-interested agendas from the table. In this case, agencies that do not wish to provide services to protect LGBTQ communities due to personal attitudes that invoke discrimination. We can then give the power to people with agendas that will promote equitable treatment of LGBTQ people and ensure their safety no matter where they go for school, work, or play. As Bowman and Deal suggest, giving power liberates energy for more productive use. If people have a sense of efficacy and ability to influence their world, they are more likely to direct their energy and intelligence toward making a contribution rather than making trouble. The gift of power enrolls people in working toward a common cause. Finally, people's needs for a sense of purpose and meaning in their work is addressed within the symbolic frame. Metaphorically represented as the temple, the symbolic frame focuses on inspiring employees by making their organization's direction feel significant and distinctive. Most challenges within this frame center on employees creating meanings within their organization, often asking themselves, how do I fit into the bigger picture of the goals of this organization? Or what is my purpose? Major concepts concerning the symbolic frame center on culture, meaning, metaphors, rituals, ceremonies, stories, and heroes, as well as inspirations. The culture within an organization is extremely important as it influences the beliefs, values, attitudes, behaviors, and practices of the employees within the organization. Most people take on the predominant characteristics of the larger group of people. Many internal factors, such as leadership and diversity, and external factors, such as recessions and regulations, influence and develop the culture of an organization. Stories about past accomplishments and challenges become embedded in the culture, and heroes take form from these stories. Establishing or increasing diversity across such areas as employee specializations, genders, and race will not only build but sustain the culture by introducing new perspectives, increasing productivity, as well as the overall effectiveness of the organization. Therefore, a leader's focus includes creating a motivating vision and recognizing exceptional employee performance through company rituals and celebrations. The final example of queer criminology that I will draw on was presented in Chapter 3 of Dwyer Ballencroft's and relates to the symbolic frame. This chapter looked at the possibility and impossibility of erasing the historical effects of LGBTQ policing and leaving negative perceptions of maltreatment during past events in the past. The 1978 Mardi Gras at King's Crossing in Sydney, Australia became quite widely known in the LGBTQ and policing literatures due to the abuse on LGBTQ participants by the local police. Despite attempts to restore relationships between the police and LGBTQ communities, police actions at a more recent 2013 Mardi Gras event became widely reminiscent of those past encounters. Consequently, this brings into question whether LGBTQ people can let go of these historical moments and begin to perceive these encounters as stereotypes or prejudices against the police. Dwyer and Thompson ask, does the persistence of the past and its memory always work against progressive LGBTQ policing? The answer in this context is yes. LGBTQ people still hold on to the old understandings of police interactions, and the events of the past now shape what people think about and their relationship with the police in the present. Although less common since the decriminalization of adult homosexual sex, it is the negative concepts, ideas, and perceptions against LGBTQ communities that come to inform police practice. And police are still found to discriminate against and abuse LGBTQ people. Within the field of public administration, we could look at these challenges and find some appropriate solutions through the symbolic frame. As previously mentioned, LGBTQ people still hold on to the old understandings of police interactions, and the events of the past now shape what people think about and their relationship with the police in the present. However, the strain in the relationship between LGBTQ people and the police is not simply because LGBTQ people can't let go. It is due to the generally homophobic and transphobic police attitudes that have been shaped by their personal beliefs, the public, and their organizations. Therefore, it is the responsibility of the police to reshape their perceptions of disgust against LGBTQ people into one of the same love and respect they have for everyone else. This change in perception for the employee and the organization often needs to start at the top. When employees want to fit in with their peers, they look to the leaders within their organization for guidance in how to behave and adapt or conform to their peers' attitudes. This conformity can either take form privately, where they internalize the beliefs and attitudes, or publicly, where they simply present to the public a certain way, but internally believe otherwise. It is through strong leaders such as judges, directors, and tenured employees that organizations can instill anti-homophobic and anti-transphobic attitudes within their organization to reshape the culture and routines and change the stories that are passed down through future generations. Utilizing a cross-disciplinary approach between public administration and queer criminology, this presentation considered how Bowman and Deal's four-frame model can inform some of the major research themes throughout the field of queer criminology. This approach is important to fill a gap that is present in the current queer criminological literature. That is, looking at topics of LGBTQ inequity and injustice through a public administration lens allows us to discover potential flaws within the system that can possibly be corrected through changes in leadership methodologies. Thank you.